The morning sun streamed through the windows of Iron Will Fitness Center as the first-class participants began filtering in for what they assumed would be another routine workout session. The instructor stood quietly by the mirror wall, adjusting the sound system with practiced efficiency. To the dozen or so members gathering for the 7 a.m. strength training class, she was simply Maya Chen, the soft-spoken fitness instructor who had started working at the gym 6 months earlier. Nothing about her unassuming presence suggested she was anything more than what her name tag indicated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya appeared to be in her early 30s, with an athletic build that seemed perfectly suited for leading aerobics classes and demonstrating proper form on weight machines. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard gym uniform of fitted athletic wear and pristine white sneakers. She moved through her pre-class routine with quiet confidence, checking equipment and reviewing her session plan on a clipboard that never seemed to leave her side. The members of Iron Will Fitness had grown comfortable with Maya's teaching style. Over the past months, she was competent but unremarkable, leading them through standard exercises with clear instruction and gentle encouragement. Her classes were popular enough, though nothing that would make anyone take special notice. She seemed to prefer staying in the background, arriving early and leaving quietly after cleaning up her equipment. Tom Rodriguez, a construction foreman, who attended the morning classes religiously, was the first to notice something unusual about their instructor. It happened during a particularly busy session when the gym's main trainer, Derek, had called in sick, leaving Maya to handle both her regular class and an advanced strength training group that included several local firefighters and police officers. The combined group created a more intense atmosphere than Maya's usual sessions. The emergency responders were accustomed to physical training that pushed their limits, and they approached the workout with a competitive edge that seemed to catch some of the regular members off guard. Maya, however, adapted to the change seamlessly, modifying exercises on the fly and maintaining control of the larger, more diverse group. It was during a discussion about self-defense techniques that things took an unexpected turn. Officer Janet Williams, a veteran of the local police force, had been explaining to other class members why physical fitness was crucial for law enforcement when she demonstrated a basic defensive stance. Her form was textbook correct, but Maya quietly approached and made a subtle adjustment to Janet's positioning. The modification was minor, shifting Janet's weight distribution by mere inches and adjusting the angle of her arms slightly. But the change transformed the stance from adequate to exceptional, providing better balance and leverage that Janet immediately recognized as superior to what she had learned in police academy training. "Where did you pick that up?" Janet asked, genuinely curious about the improvement. Maya's response was characteristically modest. "I've studied various fitness disciplines over the years. Body mechanics are important for preventing injury." But Janet's trained eye had caught something that went beyond casual study. The adjustment Maya had made reflected an understanding of combat applications that extended far beyond injury prevention. It was the kind of refinement that came from practical experience, not theoretical knowledge. The incident might have passed without further notice, except that Maya continued making small corrections throughout the session. When firefighter Mike Santos demonstrated a lifting technique, Maya showed him how to modify his grip for better leverage. When Tom Rodriguez mentioned chronic back pain from his construction work, Maya guided him through a series of movements that provided immediate relief through what she described as tension release points. Each suggestion was presented as routine fitness guidance, but the underlying knowledge seemed more specialized than what typically came with standard personal training certification. Maya's understanding of body mechanics, pressure points, and efficient movement patterns suggested education that went well beyond what was necessary for leading gym classes. After the session ended, Janet lingered as Maya cleaned up the equipment. The police officer had spent enough time around various training instructors to recognize when someone possessed skills that didn't match their apparent background. Maya, can I ask what kind of training you've had? Your knowledge of body mechanics seems pretty advanced. Maya continued organizing the weights, not meeting Janet's eyes directly. I've always been interested in fitness science. Took some courses over the years. It was a deflection, and Janet recognized it as such. In her experience, people with legitimate qualifications were usually eager to share their credentials. Maya's reluctance to discuss her background was itself noteworthy. Over the following weeks, Janet began paying closer attention to their instructor's methods and knowledge. She noticed that Maya never seemed uncertain about anything related to physical training, despite her modest demeanor. When asked about specific techniques or approaches, Maya always had answers that were not only correct, but often more sophisticated than what Janet had learned through official police training programs. The observation that really caught Janet's attention came during a session focused on core strength. Maya was demonstrating a series of exercises that she described as functional movement patterns, but Janet recognized several of the techniques as modified versions of combatives training she had encountered during advanced law enforcement courses. The exercises were presented as fitness routines, but their underlying purpose was clearly to develop the kind of body control and explosive movement capability that law enforcement and military personnel train for combat situations. Maya was essentially teaching hand-to-hand combat fundamentals while disguising them as general fitness instruction. Janet decided to test her suspicions. During the next class, she deliberately performed a grappling movement incorrectly, making the kind of mistake that would be dangerous in a real confrontation. Maya's response was immediate and telling. Without hesitation, Maya stepped in and corrected not just the exercise form, but the tactical error that could have left Janet vulnerable to a counterattack. The correction was instinctive and precise, delivered with the kind of authority that came from extensive practical experience. You want to maintain your center of gravity here, Maya explained, guiding Janet through the proper technique. And always protect your flanks when you commit to that movement. The language was unmistakable. Maya wasn't thinking about fitness routines. She was thinking about combat effectiveness. After class, Janet approached Tom Rodriguez and Mike Santos privately. Both men had been training regularly for years and had worked with numerous fitness instructors throughout their careers. Have either of you noticed anything unusual about Maya's teaching methods? Janet asked carefully. Tom nodded immediately. She knows things that don't make sense for a regular gym instructor. Last week she showed me a breathing technique that she said would help with endurance, but it's the same method they taught us for pain management during military training. Mike added his own observation. The way she moves, the way she demonstrates techniques, it's not like someone who learned from books or certification courses. She has the kind of muscle memory that comes from years of practical application. The three emergency responders began comparing notes on Maya's instruction over the previous months. The pattern that emerged was clear. Their fitness instructor possessed knowledge and skills that suggested extensive training in combatives, tactical movement, and combat conditioning. But perhaps most intriguing was Maya's apparent effort to conceal the true extent of her capabilities. She consistently presented advanced techniques as basic fitness concepts, and she seemed genuinely uncomfortable when her knowledge extended beyond what would be expected from her stated background. Janet made a decision that would soon change everything at Iron Will Fitness Center. She used her law enforcement connections to run a background check on Maya Chen, expecting to find evidence of military service or specialized security training. That would explain her instructor's unusual qualifications. What she discovered instead was far more puzzling than she had anticipated. The background check revealed almost nothing. Maya Chen appeared to have materialized 6 months earlier with basic fitness certifications, and virtually no documented history prior to her arrival at the gym. For someone with Maya's apparent level of training and expertise, the absence of any official record was more significant than any credentials would have been. It suggested that Maya Chen was either not her real name, or that her actual background had been deliberately obscured. The mystery deepened when Janet attempted to verify Maya's certifications. The training organizations listed on her resume confirmed that credentials had been issued, but the details were surprisingly sparse. When Janet pressed for additional information about the certification process, she was told that the records were restricted and could only be accessed by authorized personnel. As Janet processed this information, she realized that Iron Will Fitness Center's unassuming instructor was hiding something significant. The question was whether Maya's concealed background represented a threat or an opportunity. The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, as events beyond the quiet walls of the fitness center were about to make Maya's hidden skills a matter of urgent necessity. Unknown to the gym's members and staff, a situation was developing that would require exactly the kind of expertise that Maya had been so carefully concealing. And when that moment arrived, the woman who had been dismissed as merely a fitness instructor would be forced to reveal capabilities that would astonish everyone who thought they knew her. The crisis that would shatter Maya's carefully maintained cover arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of Captain Sarah Mitchell from the nearby Riverside Military Academy. The academy, which specialized in training elite special forces units, was facing an unprecedented emergency that had sent ripples of concern through the entire military training community. Captain Mitchell entered Iron Will Fitness Center with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, her crisp uniform and purposeful stride immediately drawing attention from the handful of early morning gym members. She approached the front desk with urgent efficiency, asking specifically for Maya Chen. Maya was leading a small group through warm-up exercises when the desk staff pointed Captain Mitchell in her direction. The military officer's presence in the civilian gym created an atmosphere of curiosity and tension that Maya recognized immediately. Years of training had taught her to assess threats and opportunities within seconds, and everything about Captain Mitchell's demeanor suggested this was not a social visit. "Miss Chen, I need to speak with you privately," Captain Mitchell said, her voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to being refused. Maya excused herself from the class, asking Janet Williams to take over the session. As they moved to the gym's small office, Maya's mind raced through possible explanations for military interest in a fitness instructor. None of the scenarios she considered were particularly comforting. Captain Mitchell closed the office door and turned to face Maya directly. "Miss Chen, I'm going to be frank with you. We have a situation at Riverside Academy that requires immediate, specialized assistance, and preliminary research suggests you may be uniquely qualified to help." Maya maintained her composed exterior while processing the implications of the statement. Someone had been investigating her background, which meant her cover was potentially compromised. The question was how much they had discovered and what they intended to do with the information. "I'm not sure how I could assist with military matters, Captain," Maya replied carefully. "I'm just a fitness instructor." Captain Mitchell's expression suggested she was not convinced by Maya's modest deflection. 3 days ago, we received intelligence about a credible threat to one of our training facilities. A group of highly trained operatives plans to infiltrate the academy and capture several of our special forces trainees who possess sensitive intelligence about ongoing operations. Maya listened without comment, her expression neutral despite the gravity of what she was hearing. "The problem," Captain Mitchell continued, "is that our regular combatives instructors are unavailable. 2 are deployed overseas, 1 is recovering from surgery, and the remaining staff lack the specialized skills necessary to prepare our people for this specific type of threat." The conversation was heading in a direction that Maya had hoped to avoid permanently. She had spent 6 months building a quiet, unremarkable life that allowed her to use her skills in safe, constructive ways. The prospect of returning to the world of tactical operations and life-or-death scenarios was something she had deliberately left behind. "Captain, I appreciate your confidence, but I think you may have me confused with someone else. My experience is limited to civilian fitness training." Captain Mitchell reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thin folder. "Ms. Chen, or should I say Major Elena Vasquez, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment's Advanced Combat Training Division." The name hung in the air between them like a detonated explosive. Maya felt her carefully constructed identity crumbling. As Captain Mitchell opened the folder and began reading from documents that should not have existed. Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism during Operation Silent Thunder. 3 Bronze Stars for valor in combat operations. Certified Instructor in Advanced Hand-to-Hand Combat, Urban Warfare Tactics, and High-Value Target Protection. Protocols. Maya closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of her past settling back onto her shoulders like a familiar but unwelcome burden. Major Vasquez was reported killed in action during a classified mission 2 years ago, Captain Mitchell continued. But certain intelligence assets have been tracking unusual patterns of activity that suggest Elena Vasquez survived and has been living under an assumed identity. The revelation was both a relief and a catastrophe. Relief because the truth was finally in the open, eliminating the constant stress of maintaining her deception. Catastrophe because it meant her peaceful existence at Iron Will Fitness Center was over. "How did you find me?" Maya asked, abandoning the pretense that had protected her for the past 6 months. "One of our analysts noticed reports from various law enforcement agencies about a fitness instructor who seemed to possess knowledge beyond normal civilian training. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When we compiled the descriptions and investigated further, certain behavioral patterns matched classified profiles we maintain on missing personnel." Captain Mitchell leaned forward, her expression shifting from official authority to something closer to personal appeal. "Elena, I need you to understand the situation we're facing. Intelligence indicates that the operatives planning to infiltrate our facility are using tactics and techniques that our current training staff cannot adequately prepare our people to counter." Maya understood the implications immediately. Special Forces trainees were exceptionally skilled, but they would be vulnerable if their opponents possessed knowledge and capabilities that exceeded their training parameters. Without proper preparation, even elite soldiers could be overwhelmed by adversaries who understood their methods and limitations. "The attack is planned for this weekend," Captain Mitchell continued. "We have 4 days to prepare our people for threats they've never encountered before. I need someone who can teach them to fight against opponents who know exactly how they've been trained to respond." The request was asking Maya to do more than simply return to her former life. It was asking her to use her most specialized skills, the knowledge she had gained through years of operations that had taken her to the darkest corners of international conflict. Elena Vasquez had not been a typical military instructor. Her expertise came from missions where conventional tactics failed and survival required adapting to situations that military manuals could not address. She had learned to fight against opponents who possessed every advantage except her willingness to exceed normal operational parameters. "Captain, the techniques you're asking me to teach, they're not standard military curriculum. They're methods developed for situations where rules of engagement become secondary to mission survival." "I understand," Captain Mitchell replied. "And I understand why Elena Vasquez chose to disappear rather than face questions about the methods used during those missions. But right now, I have 22 elite soldiers who are going to face an enemy that conventional training cannot prepare them for." Maya walked to the office window, looking out at the gym where her class was continuing under Janet's supervision. The members were going through their routine exercises, unaware that their instructor's entire identity was being dismantled in the next room. The decision she faced was not simply about returning to military service. It was about accepting responsibility for what would happen to those 22 soldiers if she refused to help. Elena Vasquez had spent her career making impossible choices, in situations where failure meant death for people who depended on her expertise. "If I agree to this, what happens afterward?" Maya asked. "That depends on how this situation resolves," Captain Mitchell answered honestly. "Your official status is complicated, but there are people in the Pentagon who understand the value of assets like Elena Vasquez. People who believe that certain capabilities should be preserved rather than discarded because of political considerations." Maya turned back to face Captain Mitchell, seeing not just a military officer, but someone who understood the weight of command decisions that affected other people's lives. "I'll need complete operational authority over the training program," Maya said, her voice carrying a tone of command that had been absent during her months as a fitness instructor. "No oversight, no restrictions on methods, and no questions about techniques that might seem unconventional." "Agreed, and I'll need to bring in additional support. There are aspects of this training that require specialized knowledge that even I cannot provide alone." Captain Mitchell nodded. "Whatever you need." Maya Chen, fitness instructor at Iron Will Fitness Center, ceased to exist in that moment. Elena Vasquez, former major in the 75th Ranger Regiment, was officially back in service. As they prepared to leave the gym, Maya paused to speak with Janet Williams. The police officer looked up expectantly, perhaps sensing that something significant was happening. "Janet, I need to take an extended leave of absence. Family emergency." Janet studied Maya's face carefully, noting subtle changes in posture and expression that suggested this was more than a routine personal matter. "Maya, if you ever need backup for whatever you're really involved in, you know where to find me." Maya smiled slightly, recognizing the offer for what it was. Janet had always suspected there was more to her instructor's background than met the eye. "I'll remember that, Officer Williams." As Maya left Iron Will Fitness Center with Captain Mitchell, she knew she was crossing a threshold that could not be uncrossed. Elena Vasquez was returning to a world where success was measured in lives saved and failure was counted in body bags. The woman who had spent 6 months teaching civilians how to stay in shape was about to teach elite soldiers how to stay alive against enemies who fought without rules. The training facility at Riverside Military Academy had been transformed into something that resembled a battlefield more than a classroom. Elena Vasquez stood before 22 of the military's most elite soldiers, each one handpicked for their exceptional skills and mental toughness. These were not ordinary recruits, but seasoned special operations personnel who had survived the most rigorous training programs the military could devise. Yet as Elena surveyed their faces, she knew that everything they had learned previously would be insufficient for what they were about to face. The intelligence reports Captain Mitchell had shared painted a picture of adversaries who understood conventional military tactics so thoroughly that they could turn those very tactics against the soldiers who employed them. "Forget everything. You think you know about hand-to-hand combat," Elena began, her voice carrying an authority that immediately commanded attention. "For the next 4 days, you're going to learn to fight like someone who never attended military training, never followed rules of engagement, and never worried about fighting fair." Sergeant First Class David Park, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, raised his hand. "Ma'am, with respect, we've all completed advanced combatives training. We've trained against unconventional opponents before." Elena nodded, acknowledging his point. "Sergeant, show me your standard defensive posture against a knife attack." Park demonstrated the technique flawlessly, positioning his body to minimize target areas while maintaining the ability to counterattack. His form was textbook perfect, exactly what military instructors had drilled into him through countless hours of practice. Elena studied his stance for a moment, then moved with a speed that caught everyone off guard. In less than 2 seconds, she had bypassed his defense entirely, positioned herself behind him, and demonstrated 3 different ways she could have incapacitated him before he could react. The demonstration was not meant to embarrass Park, but to illustrate a crucial point. Your technique is excellent, Sergeant. Against opponents who fight the way you've been trained to expect, you would be highly effective. But the people you're going to face next weekend have studied military combatives. They know exactly what you just showed me, and they've developed methods specifically designed to counter it. Elena moved to the center of the training mat, addressing the entire group. These opponents are not insurgents with improvised weapons or conventional soldiers following standard protocols. They are specialists who have made careers out of defeating people exactly like you. They understand your training because they've received similar training themselves, then spent years learning how to turn it into a liability. The atmosphere in the room shifted as the soldiers began to grasp the true nature of the challenge they faced. This was not about fighting harder or faster, but about fundamentally rethinking their approach to combat. Over the next hour, Elena introduced concepts that challenged every assumption the soldiers held about hand-to-hand combat. She taught them to recognize and exploit the predictable patterns that military training instilled, showing them how opponents could use their own reflexes against them. Military training emphasizes consistency and predictability, Elena explained as she demonstrated a technique that seemed to violate every principle they had learned. Those qualities make you effective as a unit, but they also make you vulnerable to opponents who understand your limitations. The techniques Elena taught were not found in any official military manual. They were methods she had developed during operations, where survival required adapting to situations that conventional training could not address. Each technique was designed to be used against opponents who possessed superior knowledge of standard military practices. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, one of only 3 women in the group, struggled initially with techniques that seemed to contradict years of ingrained training. "Ma'am, this feels wrong. Like we're abandoning everything that makes us effective soldiers." Elena understood the psychological challenge her students faced. "Santos, you're not abandoning your training. You're expanding it. A master carpenter doesn't throw away his hammer when he picks up a screwdriver. He uses the right tool for the specific job." As the training progressed, Elena introduced increasingly sophisticated concepts. She taught them to think like predators, rather than protectors, to use deception and misdirection as weapons, and to exploit psychological vulnerabilities that most soldiers were trained to suppress rather than target. The second day brought weapons training that bore little resemblance to standard military instruction. Elena showed them how to use everyday objects as combat tools, how to turn an opponent's equipment against them, and how to maintain combat effectiveness even when injured or disoriented. "The people you're facing will try to separate you from your primary weapons," Elena explained as she demonstrated techniques using improvised tools. "They want to force you into situations where your training becomes a disadvantage rather than an asset." By the 3rd day, the soldiers were beginning to internalize the unconventional mindset Elena was teaching. They started anticipating and countering attacks that would have overwhelmed them just days earlier. More importantly, they were learning to think creatively about combat situations rather than relying solely on practiced responses. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the Academy's commanding officer, observed the training sessions with growing amazement. He had initially been skeptical about bringing in an instructor whose methods were so far outside normal parameters, but the transformation he witnessed in his elite soldiers was undeniable. "Major Vasquez," he said during a break between sessions, "I've never seen anything like what you're teaching them. Where did these techniques come from?" Elena's expression grew distant. "Operations that officially never happened, Colonel. Situations where following standard procedures would have resulted in mission failure and loss of life." The final day of training focused on psychological preparation. Elena taught the soldiers to recognize and resist interrogation techniques, to maintain operational security under extreme stress, and to make life-or-death decisions without the support structure they were accustomed to relying upon. The hardest part of what you're going to face, Elena told them, is not the physical combat. It's maintaining your identity and purpose when everything familiar has been stripped away. As evening approached on the fourth day, Elena gathered the 22 soldiers for a final briefing. The transformation in their demeanor was remarkable. They moved with a new kind of confidence, one that came from understanding capabilities they had never known they possessed. Tomorrow, you're going to face opponents who believe they have every advantage, Elena said. They've studied your training, they understand your tactics, and they're confident that knowledge makes them superior. What they don't know is that you've spent the last 4 days learning to think like them. The attack came exactly as intelligence had predicted. Just after midnight on Saturday, 6 highly trained operatives infiltrated the academy's perimeter with the precision and coordination that characterized elite special operations. They moved through the facility with confidence born from extensive knowledge of military procedures and protocols. What they encountered instead was 22 soldiers who fought like no military personnel they had ever faced. The operatives found their carefully planned tactics neutralized by defenders who anticipated and countered every move. Techniques that should have overwhelmed conventionally trained soldiers were turned against the attackers themselves. The confrontation lasted less than 30 minutes. When it ended, all 6 operatives were in custody, and not a single academy trainee had been seriously injured. The methods Elena had taught them had proven devastatingly effective against opponents who had expected to face predictable military responses. In the aftermath, Colonel Harrison found Elena in the training facility, cleaning up equipment with the same methodical efficiency she had shown at Iron Will Fitness Center. "Major, what you accomplished here was extraordinary," he said. "Those soldiers performed at a level that should have been impossible given the time constraints." Elena nodded acknowledgement without looking up from her work. "They were already exceptional, Colonel. I just showed them how to apply their skills differently." "The Pentagon is very interested in discussing your future with the military," Colonel Harrison continued. "There are programs being developed that could use someone with your unique qualifications." For the first time since the crisis began, Elena allowed herself to consider possibilities beyond simply returning to her quiet life as Maya Chen. The success of the training program had demonstrated that her skills could be used constructively, preparing others to handle threats rather than engaging those threats directly herself. 3 weeks later, Elena Vasquez was officially reinstated to active duty with the rank of lieutenant colonel and appointed as director of the newly created Adaptive Combat Training Division. Her mission was to develop and implement training programs that prepared military personnel for unconventional threats that traditional methods could not address. The announcement of her appointment was accompanied by the declassification of selected details about Operation Silent Thunder and other missions that had earned her the decorations Captain Mitchell had referenced. The military was finally ready to acknowledge that Elena Vasquez's controversial methods had been necessary responses to evolving threats. At the ceremony recognizing her return to service, Elena was surprised to see several familiar faces in the audience. Janet Williams had taken leave from her police duties to attend, along with Tom Rodriguez and several other members from Iron Will Fitness Center. After the formal proceedings, Janet approached Elena with a smile. "So Maya Chen was really Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez all along." Elena returned the smile. "Maya Chen was someone I needed to be for a while, but Elena Vasquez is who I'm supposed to be." "Any chance the Adaptive Combat Training Division might need consultants from local law enforcement?" Janet asked. "I have a feeling there are other people out there who could benefit from the kind of training you provide." Elena considered the suggestion seriously. The threats that had necessitated her unconventional methods were not limited to military scenarios. Law enforcement, security personnel, and even civilian populations might benefit from understanding how to respond to opponents who fought without rules. Janet, I think that's an excellent idea. There's a lot of work to be done. As Alina began her new role, she carried with her the lessons learned during her time as Maya Chen. The months at Iron Will Fitness Center had taught her that her skills could be used to protect and prepare people without requiring her to become someone she was not. The woman who had been dismissed as merely a gym instructor had become one of the military's most valuable training assets, proving that sometimes the greatest service comes from those who choose to remain hidden until the moment they are needed most. Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez was home, and the soldiers under her instruction would be prepared for whatever impossible challenges lay ahead. 6 months into her role as director of the Adaptive Combat Training Division, Elena Vasquez faced a challenge that would test everything she had learned about unconventional warfare and human psychology. The secure briefing room at Fort Braxton was filled with senior military officials, intelligence personnel, and representatives from allied nations, all focused on a crisis that threatened to destabilize international security. General Patricia Hawkins, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, activated the main display screen, revealing satellite imagery of a remote facility in Eastern Europe. The compound appeared unremarkable from above, but intelligence reports painted a different picture entirely. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is the Kozlov Institute, General Hawkins began. For the past 18 months, this facility has been training operatives using methodologies that we're only beginning to understand. Elena studied the images carefully, noting details that others might miss. The layout of the compound, the configuration of training areas, and the movement patterns visible in the surveillance footage all suggested an approach to combat instruction that diverged significantly from conventional military doctrine. The concerning aspect, General Hawkins continued, is that graduates of this program have been involved in 6 separate incidents across 3 continents. In each case, they defeated security forces and military personnel who should have been more than capable of handling the threat. Colonel Rebecca Martinez, Elena's liaison with military intelligence, leaned forward. What makes this particularly troubling is that these operatives seem to possess knowledge of our training methods that allows them to neutralize our advantages systematically. Elena understood the implications immediately. Someone had taken the concepts she had been developing and weaponized them for hostile purposes. The techniques she used to prepare soldiers for unconventional threats were being used to create those very threats. Do we have any intelligence on who's running this operation? Elena asked. General Hawkins exchanged glances with several intelligence officials before responding. We believe the program is being directed by someone with extensive knowledge of Western military training protocols. Someone who understands our methods well enough to develop effective countermeasures. The briefing continued with details about specific incidents involving Kozlov graduates. A diplomatic security team in Prague had been overwhelmed by a single operative who seemed to anticipate their every tactical response. Military advisors in South America had been systematically eliminated by attackers who turned their own expertise against them. Each incident followed a similar pattern. Highly trained Western personnel found themselves facing opponents who not only matched their skills, but possessed superior knowledge of how to exploit the weaknesses inherent in conventional training. The situation has reached a critical point, General Hawkins explained. Allied intelligence services are reporting that Kozlov operatives are being deployed for missions that could compromise ongoing operations and endanger personnel worldwide. Elena absorbed the information while considering the strategic implications. If hostile forces had developed training methods that specifically targeted the strengths of conventional military doctrine, then every operation involving Western personnel was potentially compromised. General, I need to see detailed after-action reports from these incidents, Elena said. I want to understand exactly how these operatives are thinking and operating. Colonel Martinez slid a classified folder across the table. Everything we have is in there. But I should warn you, the methods being used are extremely sophisticated. This isn't improvised resistance or guerrilla tactics. This is systematic deconstruction of military effectiveness. Elena spent the next several hours analyzing intelligence reports, surveillance footage, and debriefing transcripts from surviving personnel who had encountered Kozlov operatives. The pattern that emerged was both familiar and deeply troubling. The hostile training program appeared to be using principles similar to those Elena had developed, but taken to extremes that she had never considered. Where Elena taught adaptability and creative thinking, the Kozlov program seemed to emphasize psychological warfare and the systematic exploitation of opponent weaknesses. More concerning was the evidence that Kozlov instructors possessed detailed knowledge of Elena's own methods. Surveillance recordings revealed training exercises that seemed designed specifically to counter the techniques she had taught to American special forces. That evening, Elena convened an emergency meeting with her senior staff at the Adaptive Combat Training Division. The team she had assembled included specialists from various military branches, civilian contractors with unique expertise, and former operatives who understood unconventional warfare from personal experience. We have a problem, Elena began, outlining the intelligence about the Kozlov Institute. Someone has taken our approach to adaptive training and turned it into a weapon against us. Master Sergeant Kevin Walsh, one of Elena's most trusted instructors, studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. Ma'am, these methods are sophisticated enough that whoever designed them has either studied our programs extensively or has inside knowledge of our techniques. Elena had reached the same conclusion. The precision with which Kozlov operatives targeted specific aspects of Western military training suggested access to classified information about American combat doctrine and training methodologies. We need to assume that our current training programs are compromised, Elena said. Everything we've developed over the past 6 months may be known to hostile forces. The implications were staggering. If enemy operatives understood the adaptive techniques Elena had been teaching, then every soldier who had received that training was potentially vulnerable to countermeasures they had never encountered. Captain Maya Chen, Elena's intelligence analyst, raised a disturbing possibility. Ma'am, what if this isn't just about copying our methods? What if someone is specifically trying to neutralize the advantage you've given our forces? Elena considered the suggestion carefully. The timing of the Kozlov program's emergence, shortly after her return to active duty, could be coincidental. But the specific focus on countering adaptive combat techniques suggested a more targeted effort. If that's the case, Elena replied, then we need to develop new approaches that even we haven't used yet. We need to stay ahead of people who are studying our every move. Over the following weeks, Elena and her team worked to develop training methods that would be effective against opponents who possess knowledge of their previous techniques. The challenge was creating instruction that prepared soldiers for threats they couldn't anticipate, against enemies who understood their preparation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a consultation session with civilian security specialists, Elena met Dr. Michael Santos, a behavioral psychologist who had been studying the effectiveness of various training methodologies. The problem with current approaches, Dr. Santos explained, is that they assume rational, predictable opponents. But what if you trained people to handle completely irrational threats, opponents who don't follow any recognizable pattern? Elena realized that Dr. Santos had identified a crucial weakness in the Kozlov approach. The hostile training program was designed to counter specific methodologies, but it would be less effective against completely unpredictable responses. Working with Dr. Santos and her team, Elena developed what she called chaos protocols, training methods that taught soldiers to respond effectively to situations that defied logical analysis. Instead of preparing for specific types of threats, students learned to function effectively in circumstances where normal tactical thinking was insufficient. The new training program was unlike anything Elena had previously developed. Students were exposed to scenarios that seemed impossible, trained to make decisions without complete information, and taught to maintain effectiveness when every assumption they held was proven wrong. Testing the chaos protocols required volunteers, willing to undergo training that pushed the boundaries of conventional military instruction. Elena was surprised when Janet Williams, the police officer from Iron Will Fitness Center, requested permission to participate. "I've been following your work through official channels," Janet explained during her interview. "My department deals with situations that don't fit normal patterns. I think this training could be valuable for law enforcement applications." Elena approved Janet's participation, along with several other civilian specialists who brought perspectives that military personnel might lack. The diversity of backgrounds among the trainees became an asset, as different professional experiences contributed to the development of truly unpredictable response capabilities. The test of the chaos protocols came sooner than expected. Intelligence indicated that a Kozlov operative had been deployed to target a high-value research facility where several Elena-trained personnel were providing security. The hostile operative had studied the security team's training records and developed specific countermeasures for their expected responses. What the operative encountered instead was a security team that had been trained in chaos protocols. Instead of following predictable patterns, the defenders responded to the intrusion with tactics that defied conventional analysis. They used techniques that had never been documented, made decisions that seemed illogical but proved effective, and coordinated their response in ways that the operative's training had not prepared him for. The operation was completed successfully, with the hostile operative captured and the facility secured. More importantly, post-incident analysis revealed that the chaos protocols had effectively neutralized the advantage that knowledge of conventional training methods would have provided. Elena realized that the Kozlov Institute had forced her to evolve beyond the methods that had made her reputation. The hostile program had inadvertently pushed American training capabilities to new levels of sophistication. Standing in her office at Fort Braxton, Elena looked out at the training facilities where soldiers were learning to handle impossible situations with confidence and creativity. The woman who had once hidden her abilities as a fitness instructor had become the architect of training methods that would protect American personnel against threats that conventional military thinking could not address. The challenge from the Kozlov Institute had been met, but Elena knew it was only the beginning. In a world where knowledge of military methods spread rapidly among hostile forces, the ability to remain unpredictable had become the ultimate tactical advantage. Elena Vasquez had learned to teach soldiers not just how to fight, but how to think in ways that no enemy could anticipate or counter. 2 years after the successful neutralization of the Kozlov Institute's operations, Elena Vasquez stood before an unprecedented gathering at the International Defense Innovation Summit in Geneva. Representatives from 12 allied nations filled the auditorium, each seeking to understand and implement the revolutionary training methodologies that had transformed modern military preparedness. The summit had been organized specifically to address the changing nature of global security threats and the inadequacy of traditional military responses to asymmetric warfare. Elena's chaos protocols and adaptive combat training had become the gold standard for preparing personnel to handle unpredictable hostile forces. Secretary of Defense Jonathan Walsh introduced Elena to the international audience with words that would have seemed impossible during her quiet months as Maya Chen at Iron Will Fitness Center. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez, whose innovations in military training have fundamentally altered how democratic forces prepare for and respond to unconventional threats. The applause was respectful but restrained, as befitted a gathering of senior military officials. Elena understood that many in the audience remained skeptical about training methods that challenged decades of established doctrine. Traditional military training has served us well for conventional conflicts, Elena began, her voice carrying easily through the large auditorium. But today's threats require us to think beyond traditional parameters. Our adversaries study our methods, understand our protocols, and develop countermeasures specifically designed to exploit our predictability. She activated the presentation system, displaying statistics that demonstrated the effectiveness of chaos protocol training in real-world situations. Over the past 18 months, personnel trained in Elena's methods had successfully handled 47 separate incidents involving hostile operatives trained in anti-Western tactics. The key insight, Elena continued, is that unpredictability itself can be taught and systematized. We can train people to be genuinely adaptive without sacrificing the discipline and coordination that makes military forces effective. General Francois Dubois of the French Armed Forces raised his hand. Colonel Vasquez, how do you maintain unit cohesion when individual soldiers are trained to act unpredictably? Elena had anticipated this question, as it represented the primary concern military commanders expressed about her methods. General, unpredictability in tactics does not mean unpredictability in objectives or values. Our soldiers understand their mission and their responsibilities to each other. They simply have more tools available to accomplish those objectives. The demonstration that followed showcased teams of soldiers who had completed chaos protocol training. The exercises revealed personnel who could coordinate seamlessly while employing tactics that defied conventional analysis. They maintained unit effectiveness while presenting opponents with responses that could not be anticipated or countered through traditional means. British Colonel Sarah Henderson observed the demonstration with particular interest. This is remarkable, but I'm concerned about the psychological impact on the soldiers themselves. How do you maintain mental stability when training people to think in seemingly irrational ways? Elena nodded, acknowledging the legitimate concern. That's why psychological support is integrated into every aspect of the training. We're not teaching people to think irrationally. We're teaching them to think creatively under extreme pressure while maintaining their core identity and values. Dr. Michael Santos, who had become Elena's chief psychological advisor, stepped forward to address the concern more thoroughly. Our research indicates that soldiers trained in chaos protocols actually demonstrate greater psychological resilience than those who receive only conventional training. They develop confidence in their ability to handle unexpected situations, which reduces rather than increases stress-related disorders. The questions continued for over an hour, covering everything from implementation timelines to cost considerations. Elena answered each inquiry with the thoroughness that had characterized her work since returning to active duty. What impressed the international audience most was Elena's willingness to acknowledge the limitations of her methods. Chaos protocols are not appropriate for every situation or every type of personnel, she explained. They work best with individuals who possess strong foundational skills and psychological stability. They're enhancement tools, not replacement systems. Following the formal presentation, Elena participated in private meetings with senior officials from various allied nations. Each country faced specific security challenges that required tailored applications of adaptive training principles. The Israeli delegation was particularly interested in urban warfare applications, while Scandinavian representatives focused on protecting civilian populations against terrorist threats. Each discussion revealed new possibilities for applying the core concepts Elena had developed. During a break between meetings, Elena received an encrypted message on her secure communication device. The sender was identified only as Iron Will, and the content made her smile for the first time in days. Saw the news coverage of your presentation. The gym members are proud to have known Maya Chen. Hope you remember where you came from when you're running the whole military, Janet. Alina realized that Janet Williams had somehow gained access to classified communication channels, which suggested that the police officer's career had taken interesting direction since their time together at the fitness center. She typed back quickly. Maya Chen taught me that the best training happens when people don't realize they're being trained. Still learning from that lesson. The final day of the summit brought an announcement that surprised even Alina. Secretary Walsh revealed the establishment of the International Adaptive Defense Initiative, a multinational program that would standardize and disseminate Alina's training methods among allied forces. Colonel Vasquez will serve as the initiative's first director, Secretary Walsh announced, coordinating implementation across 12 nations and ensuring that democratic forces maintain their advantage against evolving threats. The appointment represented both recognition of Alina's achievements and acknowledgement that her methods had become essential for modern military effectiveness. The woman who had once hidden her capabilities was now being entrusted with the combat readiness of allied forces worldwide. In her acceptance remarks, Alina reflected on the journey that had brought her from the classified operations that forced her to disappear through her quiet months as a fitness instructor to her current position as an internationally recognized military innovator. The greatest lesson I've learned, Alina told the assembled delegates, is that true strength comes from adapting to circumstances while maintaining your core principles. Whether you're a fitness instructor helping people stay healthy or a military officer protecting national security, the fundamental responsibility remains the same. Prepare people to handle whatever challenges they might face. The summit concluded with the signing of formal agreements establishing the International Adaptive Defense Initiative. Alina would be based at a new facility in Colorado, where she would oversee training programs for personnel from allied nations, while continuing to develop new methodologies for emerging threats. As delegates departed Geneva, Alina remained behind for a final meeting with General Hawkins and other senior American officials. The discussion focused on long-term strategic planning and the role that adaptive training would play in future military doctrine. Alina, General Hawkins said as the meeting concluded, "You've accomplished something remarkable. You've changed how we think about military preparedness itself." Alina appreciated the recognition, but she understood that her work was far from complete. The threats that had necessitated her methods were continuing to evolve, and staying ahead of hostile innovations would require constant adaptation and improvement. 3 months later, Alina stood in the main training facility of the International Adaptive Defense Initiative, watching as soldiers from 8 different nations worked together on exercises that would have been inconceivable under traditional military doctrine. The diversity of backgrounds and approaches had created synergies that enhanced the effectiveness of the chaos protocols beyond what any single nation could have achieved. Janet Williams had accepted a position as civilian liaison for law enforcement applications, bringing her practical experience with unpredictable urban situations to the development of new training modules. Other members from Iron Will Fitness Center had also found roles within the expanded program, each contributing unique perspectives that enriched the overall approach. The woman who had been dismissed as merely a gym instructor had become the architect of a fundamental shift in how democratic nations prepared their forces for modern conflicts. Alina Vasquez had proven that sometimes the most important innovations come from people who understand that true expertise means knowing how to teach others to exceed their own limitations. Standing in her office at the end of another successful training cycle, Alina looked out at personnel from around the world who were learning to think and fight in ways that would keep them alive against enemies who sought to exploit their predictability. The mission that had begun with teaching civilians Basic fitness had evolved into preparing international forces for whatever impossible challenges lay ahead. Elena Vasquez had found her true calling, not just as a warrior, but as someone who could teach others to become warriors who could adapt, survive, and protect those who depended on them. The ghost who had hidden in plain sight had become a beacon of innovation, whose influence would protect countless lives for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.